Dorchester, Massachusetts, in the state of Massachusetts, was where the neighborhood was located. It was in a quiet suburban area. The neighborhood was lit up by the soft rays of the early morning sun. And at night, the air was filled with the sweet sounds of birds singing. There were also lots of bird sounds in the area. To begin with glance, it looked like just another day, which is the most that could have been true given the circumstances. To make things even worse, it turned out to be a lot more than what was thought. Around that area, which was known for having a close-knit community and safe streets, there was a dark secret being kept behind one of the doors. The streets in the area were also known for being safe. The streets of the neighborhood were very safe, which was one of the most interesting things about the area. Horrible things were happening in a small house on Cummings Highway, and they were about to send shockwaves through the town and even farther away. The house was right next to the highway. There was a house right next to the highway. She was known for many things, including how warm she was, how strongly she fought for what she believed in, and how her fun and boundless energy could light up a room. Some of these traits were that she could make a room brighter. For as long as anyone can remember, Jahaira DeAlto has been recognized for these traits because she has them. For the rest of her life, people knew about this achievement. Jahaira was well-liked in the LGBTQ+ community, and she had spent her whole life helping others, especially those who didn't have a voice or were on the outside. She really wanted to help people who were in trouble. She had done this her whole life, even though most people around the world couldn't understand her. She was seen by many as an example of strength and hope. A huge number of people looked up to her and were inspired by her. She was someone who always fought for justice, even if it cost her personally. She stood up for what she believed in and was a friend and someone who others could trust. She was a fighter and a strong supporter of justice her whole life. That day, big changes began to happen in everything. And that day was the day that things started to change. As the afternoon went on, the cops finally got the call they had been waiting for a long time. When the police got the call, it was in reaction to another call. A friend who was worried about Jahaira decided to go to her house to check on her after several unsuccessful attempts to get in touch with her over the phone. The friend had tried all day to get in touch with Jahaira, but had not been able to. This made them realize that this choice was the best one. They were shocked to find that one of the doors had already been unlocked when they got to the house. There was an eerie silence when they walked into the building. This was the first thing they came across. When they got there, this one special thing was the only thing that welcomed them. There was no dirt or dust anywhere in the living room. It was extremely clean. Everything in the living room looked like it belonged where it was supposed to be because it was so clean. But as they went deeper into the house, they saw something that would change their lives and the lives of everyone else who knew Jahaira forever. For everyone who knew Jahaira, this change would mean something different. The way their lives would go in the future would be different because of this change. While the police were looking into it, Jahaira was found lying still in a secret part of her bedroom. Things that reminded her of the fight that had just happened were all around her after it was over. The woman who used to be full of energy and whose love of life seemed to have no end in sight had left and was no longer there. She had been completely and totally absent. The room was a mess after a fight. Furniture had been thrown over and personal items were lying all over the place. There had been an argument. Soon, the police showed up, and the house that had been a safe place for Jahaira to do her work and speak out quickly became the center of an investigation that would eventually reveal some disturbing facts. When Jahaira found out that one of her best friends and someone she trusted was now the main suspect in her death, it was even worse than the interaction itself, which was already awkward. She didn't know how Jahaira died. The ending was much scarier than the scene itself. It's amazing that this was found out. At the end of the study, an honest and painful account of a life that was taken from this world way too soon will be made public. As it turned out, the scenario would be made duo si armi avasikan. Waco uncoveri morars ano secrets mashakner bin known dolor. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts, in the middle of the 1980s. Boston is known for having a rich culture history. Boston is where she was born. It is in the state of Massachusetts that the city of Boston is found. Her mother, a single mother who worked hard but had trouble making things meet, taught her early on to be strong and not give up. She taught her daughter this lesson. This important lesson was given to Jahaira by her mother. When Jahaira was young, her mother was a single parent who had a hard time taking care of her family. It was hard for her to make ends meet, even though she had a hard childhood. The things that happened to her helped her grow up to be the kind and strong person she is now. As a child, she got some cuts and scrapes. While she was young, Jahaira often felt like she didn't belong when she was with other people. This was something that happened to her almost all the time. She had to fight the feeling that she was different her whole life because she grew up in a world that didn't understand her. This was something she had to do all the time. She has had a hard time dealing with one thing her whole life. Unfortunately, she had to face the harsh realities of a society that didn't know how to accept a transgender child. Even though she was being forced to do so, she had no other choice. Things that women usually like dolls, makeup, and clothes, were what she was most interested in. She was really interested in these things. She was most interested in having these things, even though her family was always there for her. It wasn't always easy for them to help her get through the problems that came with growing up in a world that wasn't ready for her. There was times when it was hard for them to help her, even though they were always there for her, even though they were always there to help her. It wasn't always easy to deal with them than it would have been otherwise. Jahaira, on the other hand, never let these problems shape who she was for the rest of her life. They were never able to control her. She was aware that as she got older, she was feeling more confident in herself and having a stronger sense of who she was. When she grew up, she came to this conclusion. Unfortunately, her journey was not only long, but also unpleasant, and there were many times when she was turned down, treated unfairly, and left alone. On the other hand, it was full of big and small successes that helped her understand the power that comes from sticking with something until the end. These successes taught her to see how strong people are. These accomplishments ranged in size from very small to very large. As she worked to become the woman she had always been meant to be, she fought not only for herself, but also for other people who were going through similar things. Because Jahaira was kind and accepting, she had a special place in the hearts of everyone who knew her. The reason for this was that she showed understanding and kindness. People who knew her well and had a close connection with her said she was like a guardian and would do anything to help an in-need person. She was someone who would do anything to help someone else. She was the type of person who would go to great lengths to help others if she wanted to. Not only could she make other people feel important, but her laugh was contagious. You would remember her for the rest of your life because she was my ideal woman. She had an amazing ability to forgive, to find joy even in the worst situations, and to show love even to people who had hurt her. The good in every situation was always easy for her to see. One of the most amazing things about her was that she could forgive. She was able to do all of these things. As she went further along her road as a transgender woman, she ran into more problems that most people didn't understand. She couldn't figure out most of the problems she was having. It wasn't easy for her to go down the path she picked in this situation. She was not only turned down by the people she loved, but she was also verbally and physically abused. She also had to deal with being turned down. Besides this episode, she had also been physically attacked before this one. She never let herself feel angry or bitter because of these talks. She turned her sadness into a purpose by working to raise the voices of others who had felt ignored, unheard, or abandoned. Her goal was to raise the voices of others. She made this choice because she didn't want her own pain to cause other people pain. As Jahaira went through life, she finally decided that she wanted to work as an advocate. She spoke out against injustice and fought for the rights of LGBTQ+ people, especially transgender people. She fought for those people's rights as a champion for their rights. She was a well-known political leader in the area. She was known in her community for both her strong support of equality and her skill to get other people to join the fight. Because of these two things, she got this fame. These were two things that the people in her neighborhood noticed about her. The foundation of her fame was built on these two traits together: being present, doing something, and making a clear difference in other people's lives were all things that Jahaira thought were important parts of the meaning of activism she gave. She thought that being an activist meant more than just saying what you thought. Not only did Jahaira think that saying what you think was an important part of action, she also thought that people should say what they thought. It's not true that all of her projects were about fighting for the rights of LGBTQ plus people, because Jahaira had seen the damage that domestic violence did in her own community. She was also very excited about helping other people who had been abused at home. She often spent her free time volunteering at shelters and working with groups that helped people who were trying to leave abusive situations by giving them legal help, treatment, and other resources. This was something she did often. The worries that Jahaira had, on the other hand, were not limited to the main issues that were up for discussion. Even though other people's problems might have seemed small, she made it a point to be there for them all the time and keep a positive mood. A lot of young people looked up to her as a role model because she helped them figure out who they were and where they fit in the world. Because of this, these young people looked up to her and wanted to be like her. People who needed a safe place to be could easily find it at her house. And she always had her phone ready in case anyone needed help for any reason. Besides that, she always had her phone with her. Even though Jahaira seemed to be having a lot of success, she never lost her shyness. The truth is that she has never given up on her goal. She never did what she did to be famous or get credit for it. She did it because she believed that change could make a difference and that making other people's lives better was important. Because she thought she could make a difference in other people's lives, she did what she did. The reason she did what she did was because she also thought it was important to make other people's lives better. She did what she did because she strongly believed in the value of improving other people's lives. What she did made her do what she did, because she was so sure that people could reach their full potential. She became a model citizen in the town where she lived. She never changed her mind about the fact that anything is possible. She knew the person who would become the focus of the investigation and, in the end, be found to be the person guilty for Jahaira's death based on how she died. They had been fighting with each other a lot since the start of their relationship. This is how things have been since the beginning. He met her through mutual friends, and he quickly became part of her social group. The two of them met because they had ties in common. He met her because they had ties to each other. There were times, especially during moments that Jahaira would later choose to forget, when it seemed like something more dangerous was stirring beneath the surface. Jahaira would choose to ignore these events. At first, it looked like his presence in her life didn't matter or affect her at all. There were, however, a number of cases that suggested there was something more evil going on beneath the SITRICA. The guy named Mark, who was very nice, killed Jahaira. He had been living his whole life. James Mark was the one who killed Jahaira. The things that Jahaira did led to his death. People who were close to him respected him a lot because of how charming he was and how he used words. That being said, there was a natural sense of instability that could not be denied beneath the surface. This always turned out to be the case. This was the case and could not be argued with under any circumstances. His life was marked by bad relationships, behavior that was hard to predict, and violent outbursts. All of these things were important parts of his past. Situations that came together around him made his life story uniquely interesting. His life was full of all of these events, and they're all written down in the records of his history. Because Jahaira's positive view on life affected her, she never fully understood how dangerous Mark was to her. She thought of him as someone who needed help and as someone she could lead and help, just like she had done for many other people. A good number of other people had asked her to do this. To her, he seemed like someone who needed help, and she thought she could give it to them. They talked to each other more often, and there were signs that Mark's mood swings and odd behavior were becoming harder to ignore. The reason for this was that his behavior was hard to predict. This was the case because they were happening more often, which was a reason for this. This situation happened because they talked to each other more often. At that point, he started going to Jahaira's house without her permission to talk about how he wanted more time and attention for her. He did this to show her how much he cared about her. By doing this, he wanted to show that he was interested in her love feelings. However, Jahaira never talked about it in public, even though his friends and acquaintances said that he was acting possessively and that Jahaira's comments were becoming less personal. Even though Jahaira's responses had become less close over time, this is still the case. There was more and more tension between them. and it was obvious that they would meet in the end. They were both going through this stress. In the days before he did the crime, Mark seemed to be going through a string of events that made him feel very, very worried. In these events, it looked like he was going through them. Still, in the way that Jahaira always does, she tried to keep things calm without losing her cool. She was sure that she could figure out how to deal with the problem she was having by showing that she knew what was going on. The bad news is that this will never happen, no matter how much time goes by. On the day that Jahaira died, the public learned that the house that had been a safe haven for many people had actually been used for illegal activities. There was one finding that was made during the investigation. When police got at the scene of the crime, the first thing that caught their attention was how messy the bedroom was. This particular thing was the first thing that caught their attention. There were signs that a fight had happened because the furniture was on its back and personal items were all over the floor. The fact that these signs were there supported the idea that there had been a physical altercation. The attack was so violent that there wasn't much room for artistic interpretation. The police quickly decided that Jahaira's death wasn't a mistake. After the attack happened, the body of the killed woman was found on the floor of Jahaira's bedroom. Someone found the body on the floor. All over her body were cuts and bruises, which made it clear that she had been in a serious accident not long ago. It looked like time had stopped moving while she was there. She said, investigators decided that the person who did it was someone she knew and trusted because there was no sign of a break-in. In the end, this is what their research showed. They finally came to this decision when they were done with their research. When they were done with their study, they came to MS-Ma conclusion and woe down. The question why was the first thing that everyone asked when the investigation began for the first time. There needs to be an explanation for why someone close to Jahaira, whom she had tried to help, would turn against her in such a violent and stupid way. We need to know the answer to this question. It is necessary to give answers in order to answer the question that needs to be answered. In this case, a careful and thorough study into the events leading up to Jahaira's death was carried out as part of the investigation. The details of her death were looked into by this investigation. The detectives were able to find proof that would eventually lead them to the truth because they looked into the house in great detail. The reason for doing this action was to gather information. So it was done. Even though witnesses came forward with some pieces of the puzzle, it was the forensic investigation that would finally show what had really happened, which was very scary. Indeed, this was the case. Even tough mere were witnesses. Anytime Mark told a story, there were obvious problems right from the start, and they kept happening all the way through the story. There were many mistakes in Mark's story, even though he said he was near the house the night of the murder. The proof quickly showed that he wasn't. Because of this, it was clear that he wasn't there. His statement that he was there didn't change the fact that this was really what was going on. His fingerprints were found on several things taken from Jahaira's private apartment, and security footage from businesses in the next area showed that he was in the area at the time of the murder. His fingerprints were also found on a number of things that were taken from this location. This was another piece of proof. Based on the results of Mark's psychological profile, a rather nasty picture began to take shape. His aggressive and authoritarian traits were well known, as was the fact that he often had unstable relationships with people he was close to. There was also evidence that he had a past of sexually abusing other people. Moreover, he had previously worked with others on projects like these, which was an important part of them. The study went on, and it became clearer that Mark's obsession with Jahaira was what drove him to do something that can never be forgiven. The reason for this was that Mark was crazy about Jahaira. This was the case because Mark was crazy about Jahaira. This happened because Mark was very interested in Jahaira, because the hearing included every part of Jahaira's life. It was a show for the media to watch. The reason for this was that the trial covered everything. If some people in the population die, everyone else in the population is in danger. Mark told the prosecutors that he was not guilty of the charges that were brought against him. His words made it clear that he wasn't responsible for her death, and he wouldn't take responsibility for having killed her. That being said, the facts seemed so strong that it became too much to handle. He tried to defend himself by saying that he was a victim of his circumstances, but it didn't work. He had a past of violence and abuse, but she still let him in. His past behavior as an aggressive person meant that his case did not make sense. He lost because his case wasn't strong enough. His efforts to protect himself were not enough, even though he put in a lot of work. On the bench at the same time were people who knew Jahaira and could connect to how her actions had changed their lives. A lot of people were there at the same time. All of these people were there at the same time on the same day. They were all there and not missing. Because they were examples of her traits, these people showed all of them, including her kindness, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment to helping others. They showed what a good person she was. As she spoke, she cried as she thought about her daughter's life and the promise she had made before it was horribly taken away from her. The woman who was talking about Jahaira was talking about her life. She knew very well that her daughter had been taken away from her. She was talking about how her daughter had been taken away from her. Everyone who was there could relate to the huge display of love and sadness that happened. Because it happened. This is what happened. When the trial was over, Mark was found guilty of murder in the first degree. The jurors had been hearing evidence for several weeks. This choice was made when the jury's discussions were over, and the verdict was given. People who knew Jahaira felt some justice in the decision, but the wounds that her death had left would never heal. Even though the ruling did do some justice, this is still the case. Even though the ruling did bring about some justice, this is what has happened. These people who were really worried about Jahaira now have a huge hole in their lives because she has died. This is because Jahaira loved her family and friends very much. It was hard for the community to deal with the sudden death of someone who was so smart and full of promise. Someone who was very smart and had a lot of promise was suddenly dying. It was clear that everyone was feeling a lot of different emotions at the same time, such as shock and pain. People who were looking for inspiration in their lives could still find it in Jahaira, even after she had died. Even though she had died, her work as an advocate for transgender people and other neglected groups continued to make other people's lives better. Her friends, family, and fellow activists worked hard to keep her work going all through her life. So even though she died too soon, her voice will never be forgotten. Too soon, her voice was turned down. People will never forget Jahaira's voice, even though it was muffled way too soon after it was heard. As soon as her story got out, it became a rallying cry for people who were working against violence, injustice, and bigotry. The story she told wasn't told again until after it had already been told. When Jahaira DeAlto died, the Jahaira DeAlto Foundation was created to help and support people who identify as LGBTQ+. The organization focuses on helping transgender people who have been hurt by violence and discrimination. The foundation's goal was to provide support and services to people who identified as being part of the LGBTQ+ group. Family, friends, and community made a serious promise to carry on the work she had started so that her light would continue to shine even if it could no longer shine in the world she had worked so hard to change. This was done to make sure that her light would always shine. These things were done to make sure that her light would shine for a very long time. In Jahaira's story, there are many times when she has both success and loss. These things happen at different rates of frequency. It's a powerful reminder of how fragile life is and how strong the human spirit is in the face of adversity. Even though she died in a terrible way, her influence on people all over the world will last forever. Her name will always be remembered.